So moving on to chapter 3. The very first line, here's that voice. There are years, and it's an older voice too, I think, who that omniscient person already knows what everything that's going to happen. And now it's not really didactic. Didactic is like kind of like Charles Dickens in Hard Times. He's really hitting you over the head with his point. And didactic means to instruct or to inspire. But it's a subtle didactic voice that is I think just kind of the anthropologist in her. There are years that ask questions and years that answer. And that is, you are probably young, or unless you're watching this because you want to go back through the classics, which I love you for that. But most of my audience probably, this is the years to ask questions. And remember that if you ask a better question, you will get a better answer, a more interesting answer. So she's unhappy with Logan. But what does she do? She hangs out at the gate and keeps looking for something else. When she looks for something else, she does find it. And so I think that that's kind of a significant thing in looking at a heroic journey. One of the first steps is you have to be willing to step out into the unknown. And so that's where we're going to get very quickly. This is a very short period of her life with Logan. And he does not treat her poorly. He, in a way, thinks that she's spoiled. And I think this is a good time to kind of start thinking about a Marxist interpretation. Look at the difference of the generation, of what Nana expects. She wants Janie to have a husband who has some land and basically just protect her. And in Nanny's mind, that's as good as things get. So why are you complaining that you're not attracted to him? And when she comes, she's a young girl, she thinks that, okay, I guess whenever you actually get married, then that the attraction and love and everything is supposed to happen, but it's not happening for me. And the fact that she even expects more, Logan criticizes her for being around white people. But at the same time, why shouldn't she be able to want more? Oprah Winfrey tells a story about, watching her grandmother hang up clothes or whatever, and tells her, you better pay attention because you're going to be doing this too. And Oprah's thinking, even as a small kid, no, I'm not. And she doesn't, she rises above that. But her grandmother, that she couldn't even possibly imagine something like that. So Logan Killix is part of kind of the poor proletariat. Doesn't understand that you have the ability to ask for more in life. That this is pretty much as good as it gets. And you notice that it depends on a person's background, where they grow up, when they grow up, on whether or not they are going to be able to figure out what moves them beyond the class structure. But as a Marxist theory, most of them don't move beyond it because it is all they know. And when you meet Joe, notice he's also been around white people. And he figures it out. He knows, I can't be a voice here. But if I went to an all-black community and I've saved up money and I have more money than everybody else, and his, figurative way of explaining being authoritative is by having a big voice. And that's an interesting example that you could bring up if you're talking about the narrative. Because remember, Janie doesn't have a voice. She doesn't have a voice on the porch. Her grandmother doesn't have a voice. So obviously, if you do have a big voice, then you do get to dominate. And so, who's Janie telling her story to? And this is also something I probably should have brought up earlier, but notice that she doesn't go tell her story to the people sitting on the porch. She can't even talk to them. She can't go and communicate. Why? Because they're judging her. So that's the microcosm. In the macrocosm view is Hurston wanting to tell her story with this audience. So she has to have Phoebe to herself. She has to have the love and the understanding and the friendship and the trust to be able to tell her story. But she also needs the educated Sora coming in and interjecting, to give it the full understanding. So yes, a lot of, and you see this in a lot of different novels like Heart of Darkness. Kurtz, really don't even see Kurtz, but you hear about him because he's a voice. It's that voice that says, I'm going to come in, and it's that confidence. I'm going to come in, I'm going to be in charge. And other people go, oh, okay, And so Janie now, going back to her grandmother, and she wants to try to explain to her that some folks never was meant to be loved, and he's one of them. And she says, well, how come? He says, because I hate how his head is so long one way and flat on the sides, and that phone of fat on his neck. And, he said, you never married his head. What are you talking about? And Fiddler on the Roof, she says, a husband is not to look at, he's to get. That's the mentality. You got a husband. That's what's important. But Janie is not satisfied. She's never been part of that. Just it would be kind of like what we call in today's world like the little man. If you ever listen to entrepreneurial videos and people are talking about like, don't listen to the little man. That's kind of the contrast of the mentality that people have just in the difference of our generation. Our generation, for instance, like what I'm doing, this may seem crazy to some people because in their mind, how you're only successful if you have a job. The new mentality that is coming up is like, no, that's not success. That's prison. The new success now is to create jobs. So you see that there's a shift, and Janie is ready for that. She goes looking for it. She's not satisfied. Plus, she doesn't like who she is with her husband. She has to work in a way that she's never worked before. She doesn't want to be a hired hand and do chopping wood or whatever. This is just not her. And yeah, someone like Logan could say, you're just spoiled. But she doesn't feel like, she feels like she deserves more than that. And that's kind of the beginning of her self-discovery. So she looks beyond, she's waiting for something better to happen, and she knew at the end, it says, she knew that God tore down the old world every evening and built a new one up by sunup. It was wonderful to see it take form with the sun and emerge from the gray dust of its making. The familiar people and things had failed her, so she hung over the gate and looked up at the road towards way off. She knew now that marriage did not make love. Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman. That doesn't sound like, oh, she became a woman, that's great. That sounds like she's lost her girlhood innocence. You know, I had a psychiatrist, not psychiatrist, I only saw a psychiatrist once, but, and that was at a university. They're free to university students, by the way, don't ask. But it was a psychology teacher. And this stuck with me for years because I was maybe 21 when I heard it. And he said that growing up is like, you know, stages of disappointment. And I've talked about coming of age, so, you know, it's not the wonderful moments that make you grow and getting everything you wanted, that lovely car. It's the, you know, like me, the 89 Pontiac Lamaze car that barely made it down the road that I had to get out and push. That's really what built character. But he said, you know, it's kind of like you look out to your future and you think you're going to have this wonderful job, and, you know, like everyone's going to want to read classics and never get bored and all that kind of stuff. And then you become a teacher and you find out that it's kind of a babysitting job in some schools. And you're like, what happened? You know, I had these great dreams and ambitions. And then you might look at marriage that way too. And then that could be disappointing. And then he said the third one is you might expect your children to be a certain way, and then they're not. And all of that is becoming an adult. And that's what reminds me of this, of her becoming a woman. Okay, but she's still looking, she's still hopeful. And sure enough, he shows up. Joe Sharks was the name. And he has been working with white people, and he says, but he hears about a town that's all going to be colored folks, and I've said in the introduction, this is based on Eatonville, because this is where Hurston did grow up, in an all-black community. And her father was the mayor. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if this character is kind of like the father figure. And Joe, he says he'd always wanted to be a big voice, but the white folks had all the say-so where he came from. And everywhere else, except in this place, that colored folks was building theirselves. That was right, too. The man that built things ought to boss it. You know, he's going to come in. He says, let colored folks build things, too, if they want to crow over something. And so he has money saved up, which is probably unlike anybody else in most situations, and so he's going to, what he says, buy big, and he does, and Janie is this really pretty woman that would be, you know, a great wife to come in, you know, what they used to call arm candy or something, and that's exactly how he sees her. But she makes the assumption that I think most girls make at a very young age. And this also comes from the way that we are taught from older generations of just marry rich. Well, that sounds good, but I mean, what if the guy is a complete a-hole? And you married rich, but, you know, what if he cheats on you? What if he's abusive? What if he doesn't let you be your own person? What then have you become? It's kind of like a doll's house, you know? Do you want to live in a doll's house? You might have everything taken care of for you, and that is a fantasy for somebody like a woman who's had to really work hard, and to think that, wow, you don't have to do those things. But there's something inside of you that also wants to be your own person, and what she discovers is by getting married to Joe Sharks, she's really losing herself because she's got to be Mrs. Joe Sharks. So what sounds like a really good idea is not going to turn out the way that she expects it to turn out. So she says, from now on until death, she was going to have flower dust and springtime sprinkled over everything. A bee for her bloom. Her old thoughts were going to come in handy now. But new words would have to be made and said to fit them. And so as she runs off with Joe, she's looking forward to having the life that she dreamed of under the pear tree when she figured out, what marriage is. But now she does get what she wants, and but she's also going to find out as we go through the next few chapters. And I know I went through those chapters really quickly, but there's not a whole lot but plot there. And what I want you to think about is really just the way the story is told and what you would say, going back to that chart, getting towards a claim here. What can you say now about the technique, whether you want to use point of view or her use of personification? I think personification you can use certainly in your examples, but if we can find some way to stick that in the thesis, then we'll do it towards the end. We have the incident, and then you have the theme we're working towards. How does this relate to overall the cultural identity? Or you could even add dominance or class structure. A lot of times that comes up in the AP test, and then the self-actualization, which we want to keep in mind too. So next time I'm going to discuss chapter 5 and 6, and those are a little bit longer, and we'll get into the town and what happens with her own community. And I also think I'll after that go over Maslow's model of self-actualization, but it's probably enough for one video. All right, thanks.